Ken Starr, excellent to have you on American Thought Leaders.
Hey, thank you, Jan. Good to be with you.
So, let's jump into something that's very popular in the cultural zeitgeist of the day, Special Counsel Mueller, or not Special Counsel anymore. You mentioned that this pending congressional testimony of Mueller is actually kind of a golden opportunity for Republicans. I think you've said that. I'd love it if you could go in a little deeper for the benefits of our audience and myself of what you're thinking.
Yes, I think it's a great opportunity at long last to ask some of the hard questions. One of them is, Mr. Mueller, we appreciate your service to the country. You were a Marine, you fought in Vietnam, etc. But let us ask you the following questions. When did you personally conclude that there was no collusion? Now, I think Bob Mueller will, and I know him well and served alongside him in the Justice Department, and he's a wonderful human being. But I'm very concerned about this point. This investigation proved to be so disruptive to the presidency. And Mueller's 447-page report just cries out with the voice of the president, whose voice is quoted a lot, tweets, comments that the president makes internally to his closest aides, not just to Don McGahn, his White House counsel,
right,
to people outside the community of public servants, to Chris Christie.
Right.
It's a cry of the heart. Help me get rid of this terrible investigation. It's unfair. There's absolutely no basis for it, and so forth. And unfortunately, that reaction by the president is being held against him by Bob Mueller in the second part of the report on obstructive acts. Every time the president would tweet and complain about the investigation is simply another arrow in the special counsel's quiver. I profoundly disagree with that approach by Mr. Mueller. And so I think, ask him first, when did you conclude that there was no collusion, or as he would say, not sufficient evidence?
Despite this quiver of arrows, Yeah.
When did you discover that? And did you consider reporting that, and did you report it to the Deputy Attorney General of the United States, who was the acting Attorney General Rod Rosenstein? If not, why not? There's nothing in the regulations that would have prevented you from saying, here's a confidential report, it's an interim report, we still have other things underway, whether it's Paul Manafort or whatever.
Yeah.
And if he says, I only reached that conclusion in March of the year of our Lord 2019, then that's his testimony, but we need to know that. The question I would like to ask him is, do you recognize how profoundly disruptive this investigation was to the president in his own view? And you don't seem at all in the report to acknowledge the fact that the president felt that it was unfair, it was wrong-headed, that there was no basis for the collusion, there was no Russian connection, etc. So there are a whole series of questions along those lines that just help us understand this. I think this goes to the integrity of the investigation.
Right.
Perhaps Bob Mueller will acquit himself brilliantly and persuasively. I think, by the way, on the Democratic side of the aisle, they will simply read from his report the most damning, as they see it, portions that are unflattering to the president and say, do you stand by this, or words to that effect. So it will be, I think, for some few hours, a public reading in a more dramatic way of the report, because Bob Mueller has made it very clear, the report, which is 447 pages long, speaks for itself. That's my testimony. Right. Is this still your testimony? Yes. Who knows? I'm frequently wrong, but that's my prediction.
So let's say that Bob Mueller were to say that I decided earlier, at some point earlier than March of 2019. What are the implications of that in your view?
The implications of that, I believe, are these. It would have been helpful to the nation had you made that known. There was so much speculation about, quote, collusion. And didn't the nation deserve to know that sooner rather than later? And did you simply carry on, even though the evidence was cumulative? You never charged Carter Page. He is the person who got all this started,
Right.
so to speak, with
Right.
the dossier and all that,
FISA.
the Steele dossier. And do you recognize that the President of the United States' view is you hurt this country? You hurt his ability to carry on his operations, his work as the President of the United States. We know you didn't like his tweets. A lot of people don't like his tweets, but do you understand his frustration as a human being? When he, and you quoted this time and time again, you didn't just quote it once, Mr. Mueller, that when Jeff Sessions told the President of the United States that a special counsel is being reported, you have this very provocative quote. And by the way, that was in the inner sanctum of the White House, wasn't it?
Right.
That really should have been protected by executive privilege, shouldn't it? If you were the president's lawyer, would you have wanted that expletive to come out? A very nasty word, which the president shouldn't have said, but he said it internally. He didn't say it like Beto O'Rourke does
Right.
on the campaign trail. He is entitled to some sense of presidential privacy. But you intruded into that, didn't you? And you kept repeating it, didn't you? Why did you keep repeating that? Very provocative reaction, a spontaneous utterance. Do you see where I'm going on this?
No, absolutely, I do. I mean, at Epoch Times, we've been reporting on, I mean, we dub it Spygate. It has different names, right? This is the other side of Russia collusion,
Yeah.
and so forth. So all these questions are very interesting to us, right?
Good.
So tell me, how, you have a book, Contempt, right? I'm going to show it here to the camera. That's out right now. There's actually a connection between the Mueller investigation and the aftermath and the book. Can you tell us a little bit?
The tie, the bridge is impeachment. And going through the experience that I did under the independent counsel statute and the report that I was obligated as a statutory duty to report to the Congress about impeachment stands in very sharp contrast to the Bob Mueller obligation under the regulations.
Okay.
Bob Mueller, under the regulations under which he was appointed, so we need to do just a little bit of law, but it's very simple. This is Law 101.
Sure. Absolutely.
Law 101 says, oh, how did he become special counsel? Had to get all this power. Well, he was appointed. Well, what does the appointment power say, the appointment document say?
Okay.
Well, the appointment document is you look into collusion, et cetera, right? Well, what was the authority for appointing him? The authority from the deputy attorney, he didn't just make it up. He said, well, I have regulations that have the force of law. And under those regulations, which he specifically invokes, the Deputy Attorney General invokes those regulations in sentence number 1.
Right.
Pursuant to the authority given me, we want power to be accountable to we the people, right? I appoint you to do a job. Now, what is his job? We then go to the regulations to see the broad contours of what his task is. And the end product was to be a confidential report to the Attorney General of the United States explaining the special counsel's decisions to prosecute and to decline prosecution.
Okay.
Bob Mueller did that beginning at page 175 of the report.
Okay.
It's entitled, Part 5, Prosecution and Declination Decisions. That's all he owed
So
to
what?
the
So
Attorney
what are
General.
parts 1 to 4?
Facts and more facts, revealing conversations by the president, the background of the firing of James Comey and so forth. But he didn't-
So extraneous stuff that is actually outside the mandate in your view.
You use the term extraneous. I would say it was background. I would say it was unnecessary.
Okay.
For some reason, I'm happier with just saying it was unnecessary under the terms of the regulations, because he himself, Bob Mueller, said, okay, we've come to Part 5 of the report. Let's now write prosecution and declination decisions. We're now at page 174 or 175 of our report. Let's write that. That's all he was obligated to do.
Right.
Now that brings us in really sharp contrast to what he calls Book 2 or Part 2, which are the so-called Obstructive Acts,
Right.
the 10 obstructive acts. That goes on for 160 or 170 pages as well. That, to me, was essentially now the connection back to the book Contempt,
Okay.
a memoir of the Clinton investigation. There was no authority for him to write that.
Oh.
He wrote it for the Congress, and he even says so. He doesn't say, "Dear Congress." He doesn't say, "Dear Jerry Nadler." He's not that explicit about it, but that's what it is. And he even says so on page 1. And then he says so again toward the end of the report, of that part of the report. He wrote an impeachment report. He turned himself into a statutory independent counsel who was statutorily, I'm putting myself, Jan, obligated to provide an impeachment referral to the House of Representatives. That was not his duty. He turned himself into an agent of Congress.
Fascinating. And I actually didn't understand this distinction until this moment. So thank you.
You're
for
welcome.
expressing that.
Well, I think it's important for
Yeah.
this distinction to come out in the course of the hearings, whenever the hearings are held. They've been
Right. They were
rescheduled.
supposed to be next week, but now it's going to be possibly another time. Okay. Well, you're here to talk about religious freedom.
Yes.
And and tell me a little bit about where your involvement or your passion around that.
Well, religious freedom is our first freedom. The very first words, the first 16 words of the First Amendment of the Bill of Rights. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Then there's a semicolon, and then we go into freedom of speech and the press and the right of the people peaceably to assemble to petition the government for redress of grievances.
Right.
Those are the words of the First Amendment. But the first freedom is religious freedom. Both, we don't want Congress or the states, quote, establishing a church. We do not want a Church of the United States. We do not want a Church of England or a Church of Canada counterpart here in the United States.
Right.
Moreover, we want to respect freedom of conscience. That's what free exercise is about. Free exercise is more than simply going to church or synagogue or mosque or wherever your place of worship is. It is the free exercise religion. It is for you to live out your faith, or lack thereof, but to live out your faith in everyday life. And I've been involved in cases involving religious freedom. I've written amicus briefs, friends of the court briefs, as a private lawyer. I have argued cases in the Supreme Court of the United States and in lower courts involving religious freedom. I love our Constitution. I love our Bill of Rights, all 10 of our Bill of Rights. I don't want to ignore any of them, but my passion is triggered by the first of the first freedoms. We need freedom of speech. We need freedom of the press. We need the right, as we are here, peaceably to assemble.
Right.
And then there's some people with petitions here. I love it. Petitioning the government. We're in Colorado. Petitioning the government to redress their grievances. This is the sign of a free society. And I don't think a single person here is worried about cameras catching us,
Right.
profiling us, individuals coming in as agents of the government to see what's going on. We would recoil at that, wouldn't we? But welcome now to international religious freedom, and especially the largest single threat to religious freedom in the world is China.
Yes.
Now, we can talk a lot about radical Islam, and I'm happy to talk about that, but 1.3 billion people, Uyghur Muslims, Christians, the Falun Gong, Buddhists, all religions are under assault from this very evil regime of Xi Jinping. Evil, evil, evil. And I hope that increasingly friends of freedom, whatever their faith journey is, or just friends of freedom, sentinels of freedom, will become increasingly aware of the horror that is happening in China, which apparently is as bad as the horrors of the Cultural Revolution.
Well, it's touching in a way to hear you say that, because our media was actually founded by Chinese Americans 20 years ago to basically combat Chinese Communist Party fake news about what they were doing around this particular issue. We were founded around the time the Falun Gong persecution began.
Yes.
And there was a horrendous amount of hate propaganda that was being put out by all Chinese Communist Party voices about these people to justify their eradication, to quote the dictator at the time, Jiang Zemin. So this is a powerful message to hear from you. So how is it that you became aware of China?
Oh, I've been interested in international religious liberty issues forever. I serve on the board of Advocates International, which is a spinoff of the Christian Legal Society, which was founded at the time, Jan, of the dissolution of the evil empire of the former Soviet Union, and as the future democracies were emerging in Eastern Europe, Macedonian calls, as we say in New Testament parlance, Macedonian calls for assistance were forthcoming, and so I was very involved in the Christian Legal Society. I still serve on that. I serve on that board.
Excellent.
But I was
hear.
present at the creation of Advocates International, which is a network of Christian lawyers from all over the world. Over 120 countries are represented in our network of advocates, and we work in our own countries, but collaboratively, and we, especially from the United States, are able, given our freedoms, to reach out and try to help lawyers who are defending the rights of Buddhists or the Falun Gong or whomever,
Absolutely.
where freedom is under assault. So it's a Christian organization, but it is an organization that focuses on religious freedom for all purposes, the freedom of conscience and belief and practice for all people, including non-believers.
Ken, tell me, you were at this recent Taiwan conference. Can you tell me a little bit about your experience there?
Yes, the Taiwan Conference on International Religious Liberty was held in late May and early June, and it concluded with a press conference on June 1 and a number of resolutions of the conference, including one directed, and I drafted that particular resolution, the Division of Labor, condemning the treatment of the Uyghur Muslims in China.
Right.
And especially the concern about organ harvesting, which Falun Gong has had these wretched experiences with. But one of the things that I just wanted to say about that conference was I was so impressed. There were 23 countries represented, primarily from Asia, but also from Europe as well, and the United States, Canada. The president of the country and the vice president of the country not only attended the conference, not to make a cameo appearance, but each made a very powerful statement condemning human rights abuses and the lack of religious freedom in China. And I thought, what a courageous and bold statement. It's easy for me, in the safety of freedom, in the land of the free and the home of the brave, the United States of America, to say these things. But to be in Taipei, in Hsinchu, in Taiwan, and to hear the president of the country, 60 miles across the sea, this mighty force determined to bring Taiwan in. So those 25, approximately million people, dwarfed geography, population, economic power, military power. And here's the president of the country speaking truth to power in Beijing, condemning the treatment of Uyghur Muslims, condemning the treatment of Christians, condemning the treatment of Tibetan Buddhists. This was, and the Falun Gong, this was a really eloquent statement to the human spirit and the indomitable desire for human freedom.
So what do you make of the current administration's approach to China in contrast to previous approaches from the perspective of advocating for religious freedom and the threat that China poses to freedom-loving people everywhere?
Well, I praise Secretary Pompeo, who cares deeply about these issues, another ministerial gathering of folks from around the world. And I gather that the Chinese authorities are trying to dissuade people from other countries. I mean, these are the thugs in Beijing. And I don't mind calling them that. I mean, they're murderers and they're thugs. And they're trying to use their power and influence. And this is a regime of evil trying to keep this from happening. But back to the administration. Then a brilliant choice by the president and Ambassador Sam Brownback, who just spoke to this conference, who is a great man, a great public servant, great heart for freedom, Vice President Pence, whom I've known since his House of Representatives days. I had the honor of working with him when he was governor of Indiana. I've stayed in the governor's mansion and eaten the dainties of the king, so to speak,
Right.
is what you say in the olden days. But that brings me to the president. I think the president's heart is in the right place. I'd like to see more action from the president himself. Looking, I'll go back, Vladimir Putin in the eye and not kidding around and saying, Vladimir, I know what you did, and I don't want to, but you deserve a spanking. So here's the additional spanking that you're going to get. And your oligarchs, the oligarch who funded all the disruptive activity, we want him in the United States, and we want him to stand trial. Will you make that happen? You see what I'm saying? Yeah. Now, with Xi Jinping, trade is very important, but man shall not live by bread alone. And so I understand the president is a business guy and he wants to make deals, and this is in the way, or it's an impediment to making a deal because these are, quote, the internal affairs of China. So I would say to the president, Mr. President, we understand that. We understand that you're responsible in a unique way for the peace and prosperity of our time. You clearly don't want to engage in military activity. We saw that recently, calling back U.S. forces with respect to the Iranian strike. We applaud that. We praise you for it. But it's a very dangerous world when this repressive regime in China isn't held to account by the entire international community. And you are the most powerful person in the international community. Please hear our cry. Say something to Xi Jinping, but also back it up with sanctions. Sanctions work, by the way. People say, oh, sanctions don't work. It is my understanding that there was recently a release from, I'm just going to say, a predominantly Muslim country of an individual who was in custody, thanks to the EU saying, we're just about to cut off some payments that are otherwise going to this predominantly Muslim country. And that person was then released.
Oh, very, very interesting. Any final words before we finish up?
Well, let freedom ring. I'm so glad that your audience is focused on preserving the traditions of freedom in the United States. And my final words are just a quote from the preamble to America's Constitution, we the people of the United States, to form a more perfect union, and then it goes on. But the first order of government after forming a more perfect union is to establish justice. That comes even before to provide for the common defense, to ensure domestic tranquility, and then the closing, and to preserve the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. So here we are. We're the posterity, and we still have these blessings of liberty, and may we always be on guard to protect the blessings that we have inherited, the blessings that God provides, but it's up to us to protect our freedoms.
Powerful words to finish up with. Ken Starr, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jan. My pleasure.